Senate Energy and Interior Committee will come to order. Filling in for Senator Manchin, who is on his way and will be joining us shortly. We meet today to consider 3 pending nominations. The nominations are Mr. Willie Phillips to be the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission member, Mr. Brad Crabtree to be the Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, and Mr. Charles Sams to be the Director of the National Park Service. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for your willingness to serve. And each of you will be able to welcome your family members soon, so thank them for being here as well. Our first nominee, Mr. Phillips, has been nominated to be the seat on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission vacated by Mr. Neil Chatterjee at the end of August. I have said that the best FERC is one that is fully seated. I am pleased to have Mr. Phillips' nomination before us this morning so we can get FERC back to its full strength as soon as possible. I'm especially pleased that the President has nominated someone of Mr. Phillips' stature and experience. The law establishing FERC says that members of the Commission shall be individuals who, by demonstrated ability, background, training, and experience, are specifically qualified to assess fairly the needs and concerns of all affected by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and Mr. Phillips meets that test. He has regulated natural gas and electric utilities as a member of the District of Columbia's Public Service Commission for the past 7 years. He has chaired the commission for the past 3 years and has worked in the energy field for nearly 20 years as a regulator and as the Assistant General Counsel for the North American Electric Reliability Corporation and lawyer representing utility clients. As a regulator, he has shouldered the responsibility for keeping the lights on at natural gas lines and to keep people safe and rates low for individuals. He will bring a valuable experience and perspective to the commission, and I'm pleased to support his nomination. Our next nomination is Mr. Brad Crabtree, who's been nominated to be the Assistant Secretary of Energy and Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. Although the title is new, the office has been there for more than 40 years, and its statutory basis is still older than even the department itself. Over 60 years ago, the Coal Research Act of 1960 directed the Secretary of Interior to develop thorough research and new and more efficient methods of using our abundant coal resources for the nation's benefit. This duty still exists and now rests with the Assistant Secretary of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. The role of fossil fuels play in our energy mix and their impact on the global climate change has changed dramatically. But we will need to continue to meet our energy needs, and that's why research and development on fossil fuel and carbon management is even more important than ever. I understand that, Mr. Crabtree, you have been the Great Plains Institute Vice President for Carbon Management over the last 9 years. You have previously testified the importance of carbon capture use and storage technologies and have worked with state officials to promote their development. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and how we manage this resource. Mr. Sams, our third nominee, who has been nominated to lead the National Park Service. This committee has oversees dozens of offices, bureaus, and services that perform important regulatory or management functions, but none has a deeper connection with the American people than the National Park Service. The National Park Service is a steward and guardian of our nation's most iconic landscapes and its most treasured and historic lands. It manages them for the benefit and the enjoyment of the American people, and it has a duty to preserve these for future generations. Our national parks and our national heritage, I believe, are priceless treasures. So serving as the director of the Park Service is a sacred trust. And remarkably, the National Park Service has been without a Senate-confirmed director since January 2017, the longest lapse in the office, which was established in 1916. So by law, the director of the National Park Service must have substantial experience and competence in land management and natural cultural resources. Mr. Sam clearly has worked in the natural resources conservation field for over 25 years and clearly meets that test. And I also want to congratulate you. I know Senator Wyden is going to be here, I think, to also add comment or maybe formally introduce you, but as you will be one of the first Native American people to serve as park directors, so that's a big moment for all of us as a member of the Umatilla tribe and someone from the Pacific Northwest, so congratulations on your nomination. At this point, I turn to our ranking member, Senator Barrasso, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and I would also like to add my welcome to Mr. Sams, Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Crabtree to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and congratulations to each of you on these nominations. Mr. Sams has been nominated to serve as Director of the National Park Service. If confirmed, he would be the first enrolled tribal member, as you had mentioned, to serve in this position. He's worked in state and tribal governments and in the nonprofit natural resource and conservation management fields now for more than 25 years. When asked about Mr. Sams' nomination by E&E News last month, Senator King, who is the chairman of the subcommittee on natural parks, said, quote, "My only concern is that he doesn't have any direct experience within national parks or National Park Service, but I'm reserving judgment." And I share Senator King's concern, and I am also reserving judgment. I would like to hear more today about Mr. Sams' vision for the National Park Service. I hope Mr. Sams will commit to working with me and other stakeholders in Wyoming to continue to maintain and improve our state's beautiful national parks. One issue that needs to be addressed is transportation in the Grand Teton National Park. If confirmed, I look forward to working with him to improve visitor access and safety in the Moose-Wilson corridor. I also hope Mr. Sams will work with me to allow the public to more easily film and share their national park visits without the requirement of a permit to do so. I've introduced legislation to address this issue. Mr. Phillips has been nominated to serve as a commissioner on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the FERC. Mr. Phillips has nearly 2 decades of experience as a utility regulator and an attorney in private legal practice. If confirmed, Mr. Phillips would play an important role in regulating electricity and natural gas so that all Americans benefit from an affordable and reliable energy. As an independent regulator, Mr. Phillips would also have the opportunity and the obligation to explain the disastrous consequences of reckless policies that House Democrats want to ram through Congress. House Democrats want to end all new oil and natural gas production on federal lands and waters. If enacted, these policies would surrender America's energy independence to OPEC and to Russia. House Democrats also want to impose a natural gas tax on American families and businesses. At a time when inflation is at its highest level since 2008, Democrats in the House want to make it more expensive for American families to heat and power their homes. The House Democrat plan would also establish a so-called Clean Electricity Performance Program. This scheme would use an estimated $150 billion of taxpayer money to pay off the largest utilities in the country to install wind turbines and solar panels. It will also allow those utilities to charge their customers for new transmission lines to service these facilities. I'd like to hear from Mr. Phillips on how he thinks these policies will impact the affordability and the reliability of electric and natural gas services. Mr. Crabtree has been nominated to serve as Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management at the Department of Energy. Mr. Crabtree has worked in the carbon capture space for over 2 decades. He is well aware that Wyoming leads the nation in carbon capture research. Wyoming is investing millions of dollars in carbon capture development as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Crabtree's support of carbon capture research is a sign that he understands the important role that fossil fuels must play in our nation's energy future. Congratulations to each of you as the nominees. I look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. The rules of the committee, which apply to all nominees, require that they be sworn in conjunction with their testimony. So if you would please stand and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you are about to give to the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Before you begin your statements, I would like to ask 3 questions to each of the nominees. 1, will you be available to appear before the committee and other congressional committees to represent department positions or respond to issues of concerns to the Congress?
Yes.
Second, are you aware of any personal holdings, investments, or interests that could constitute a conflict of interest or create the appearance of such a conflict should you be confirmed and assume the office to which you have been nominated by the President?
No. No. No.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't hear that. 3, are you involved or do you have any assets held in a blind trust?
No. No.
Okay. Before we go to the nominee statements, I would like to recognize Senator Wyden, who is here to introduce Mr. Sams to the committee. So Senator Wyden, if you are ready, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And it is a pleasure to be able to introduce Chuck Sams of Oregon, President Biden's nominee, to be the next director of the National Park Service. Now, the Park Service, colleagues, we all know is not just about pretty places and photo ops. As director, Chuck Sams will be responsible for an organization of more than 22,000 employees and almost 222,000 volunteers at park units in every state in the country, generating almost $40 billion for our economy. The Park Service does it all, from education to the maintenance and management of everything in our parks, from wildfire to roads to water, and from urban parks to rural parks. The National Park Service is an American institution with extraordinarily deep community roots. I have known Chuck Sams for years, and during our work together, I have seen firsthand his commitment and dedication to people and the outdoors. He has been a real leader and a role model in the stewardship of American land and waters, wildlife, and history. And as a longtime leader of the Umatilla tribe, he's shown a real commitment to his people and the citizens of Oregon, and most recently on the Northwest Power Council to the entire Pacific Northwest. Finally, the Park Service gives us the ability to reach places most Americans would not or could not otherwise reach, and they play a vital role in teaching us. And I can't think of anybody in America better and more qualified to do this than Chuck Sams, with his unique perspective as the first Native American to lead the Park Service. Colleagues, this is frankly long overdue. Chuck's going to have a big job cut out for him. We know there's crowding in the parks, a multi-billion-dollar maintenance backlog. A changing climate, of course, produces increased wildfires and droughts, and unfortunately, a workforce culture fraught with gender discrimination and harassment. I'll just close by saying thank you to colleagues who have talked to me about Chuck Sams. This is a person who represents the very best of my state. He listens. He doesn't just listen, he hears people, and he cares, and he follows up. So, Chuck Sams, we're sure glad you're here today. And all Oregonians this morning are proud that you are here on behalf of our state, and more importantly, on behalf of the whole country, to outline how you would proceed to tackle this extraordinarily important job. And I thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I appreciate the courtesy as well.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. And now we have Senator Hoeven, who would like to make an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to welcome all three of our witnesses. In particular, I'd like to welcome Brad Crabtree, who I've known for many years and know members of his family as well. He is from North Dakota and attended the Georgetown School of Foreign Service, received a Master of Arts of History from Johns Hopkins University, and as the chairman said just a minute ago, has a lot of background with carbon capture and storage. And in North Dakota, we are and in fact intend to do everything we can to crack the code on carbon capture and storage. So I think it's important that he has a background in that work. And we very much look forward to hearing from Brad how he intends to help us do exactly that. So again, I want to welcome all of our witnesses and welcome Brad here today for this important hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And let me just say, I like to read a letter that in support of Mr. Phillips, and this is both Senator Browse and I have received a letter from Mayor Bowser this morning, which praises your strong acumen for the law and business, your demonstrated ability to balance competing interests to promote innovation, efficiency, and resilience, and your skill and experience for consensus building that has won the respect of colleagues, advocates, and stakeholders. I ask unanimous consent to enter Mayor Bowser's letter into the hearing record, along with all other letters of support that we have received on behalf of all three nominees. Hearing no objection, it is ordered. Okay. We'll now begin our questions.
They got to testify first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I get a little ahead of myself, huh? Let's see who we're going to hear from first. So what we'll do, we'll begin with our opening statements, and Mr. Sams, you'll be first.
Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and committee members. And thank you, Senator Wyden, for those kind introductions. I'm joined today by my wife, Lori Sams, and my oldest daughter, Rosavelli Sams. Our son, Chauncey, and daughters, Clara and Ruby, are home in Oregon. I'm honored and deeply appreciative to be the President Biden's nominee to be the 19th Director of the National Park Service, and I'm grateful for the invitation to appear before this distinguished committee. I'm an enrolled tribal member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. I am Cayuse and Walla Walla with blood ties to the Yankton Sioux and Kokopah peoples. On my American Indian side of the family, we have lived here since time immemorial, or for at least 15,000 years. I'm also Dutch and French descent. Two of my great-grandfathers came west to Oregon in the 1800s. Hendrik Sams immigrated to the American colonies in the mid-1700s, and his descendants came west on the Oregon Trail in the 1850s. My great-grandfather, Joseph LaRock, came to Oregon Territory in 1812 and worked for the Pacific Fur Company. My great-grandmother, Mary, was a Walla Walla and Cayuse tribal member and the daughter of Chief Pio Pio Mox Mox, head man of the Walla Walla people. My personal history is deeply interwoven with the fabric of our shared American history. After serving in the United States Navy as an intelligence specialist, I worked in natural resources and conservation management across the nation in urban and rural areas for nearly 30 years now. I have served in local, regional, national organizations that have conserved fish and wildlife and our common spaces of land. My record is one of engagement and collaboration. Some of my closest friends and colleagues in Oregon are non-Indian farmers and ranchers. Most recently, I served as the Umatilla Tribe's Executive Director and Deputy Executive Director, managing over 190,000 acres of land and resources with over $700 million in assets, while also co-managing with local, state, and federal agencies over 6 million acres of land that were granted to the United States under the Treaty of 1855. I currently serve as a council member of the Pacific Northwest Power and Conservation Council with a jurisdictional area covering Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana, working to ensure that we can meet the power needs of our people and economy and to protect fish and wildlife. The National Park Service is a very special agency with a timeless mission to preserve resources and to inspire current and future generations. I'm excited to lead that mission. Although I have not worn the National Park Service uniform, I have worn the uniform of the United States Navy during wartime, and I wear the regalia of my tribe to honor my ancestors and elders. These uniforms are reminders of the sacrifices made to protect our homelands and the responsibility to pass down those lands in a stronger state than they are now. I have a tremendous respect for the people and places of the National Park Service. While hiking recently on the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument with my family, I was struck by the professionalism and the expertise of the rangers and realized that I've visited over 100 national park areas and monuments over the past 50 years. This time with our national treasures taught me the importance of being an American and being part of something bigger in life. The National Park Service cannot achieve its mission without a well-supported workforce, and I'm committed to focusing on the caretaking of this mission. Staffing, housing, and other issues are impacting morale and deserve active attention. I'm also very aware of the concerns about the harassment of National Park Service employees, particularly women, and I have always had a zero-tolerance approach in harassment and will bring this to the position if confirmed. As for the sites themselves, our treasured national parks is not just lakes and mountains. The agency safeguards some of the country's most solemn and hallowed places: the bed where Abraham Lincoln died, the steps of the Lincoln Memorial upon which Martin Luther King Jr. professed his vision for a better America, the graves of our service members and our presidents. Despite the clarity of the National Park Service mission, there are differences in opinion about how to accomplish it. In Indian country, we expect an open discussion with the federal government prior to making decisions, not after the fact. If confirmed, I will bring this spirit of consultation to the service as director. I look forward to consulting with neighboring communities, stakeholders, local, state, and tribal governments, and members of Congress, even when the conversations and topics are challenging. I can assure you I take this responsibility seriously. I hope to earn your support to be the 19th Director of the National Park Service. I've appreciated speaking with many of you and learning from your insights. If confirmed, I'm committed to provide for the protection, stewardship, and public use and enjoyment of our national parks. Thank you. and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sams. And now we're going to have Mr. Crabtree.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso.
You want to turn your mic on, sir?
Okay, sorry. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, members of the committee. It is an honor to appear before you today. I also want to thank my own Senator John Hoeven for his kind introduction, and it's been a pleasure to work with you all these years since your first term as governor of my state. It's a tremendous honor to be nominated by President Biden to be Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, and if confirmed, to have the opportunity to work with Secretary Granholm and the terrific team at the Department of Energy. As a native North Dakotan, I spent my early years hunting and fishing with my father, who was a deeply conservative and passionate conservationist, and I grew up among people who earned their livelihoods on farms and ranches and in mines, power plants, and oil fields. My wife, daughter, and I also raised cattle and sheep and direct marketed grass-fed lamb and beef on our ranch in North Dakota for 15 years, where I still live and work today. Shaped by these experiences, I have dedicated my professional life to advancing energy solutions that fulfill our climate obligations while meeting the needs of people, communities, and regions that depend on traditional energy, agriculture, and industry. My work as Vice President for Carbon Management at the Great Plains Institute has built bridges, in some instances for the first time, among industry, agriculture, NGOs, organized labor, and others, across different states and regions, and perhaps most importantly, between Democrats and Republicans. Carbon management, a mission priority of DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, has been a principal focus of my work for 20 years. Beginning in 2001, I co-led the Institute's Powering the Plains project. It forged private sector, NGO, and state policymaker agreement on a comprehensive 50-year energy strategy for the upper Midwest. This in turn informed the 2006 launch of an energy and climate initiative of the Midwestern Governors Association, for which I coordinated energy policy and climate advisory groups. This effort ultimately made groundbreaking commitments to carbon capture and storage at that time. In 2011, I co-founded and still serve as staff director of the Carbon Capture Coalition, an 80-plus member partnership of companies, labor unions, and conservation and environmental organizations that's dedicated to economy-wide adoption of carbon management. Over several years, the coalition actively supported legislation that became the landmark bipartisan reform and expansion of the Section 45Q tax credit in 2018. Finally, I understand the important role that states must play in implementing carbon management. Working with former Republican Governor Matt Mead of Wyoming and Democratic Governor Steve Bullock of Montana, my institute colleagues and I established the State Carbon Capture Work Group in 2015. This now 16-state work group has produced important analyses and bipartisan recommendations to accelerate commercial deployment of technology and infrastructure. I believe the United States must lead in developing technologies to tackle climate change, and that DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management has a key role to play in helping commercialize and deploy these technologies to decarbonize our energy and industrial system, while maintaining reliability and affordability. Proving out these technologies at scale here at home enhances our credibility in persuading China, India, and other major economies to do their part, vastly increasing prospects for averting the worst impacts of climate change. And domestic leadership can position the U.S. to manufacture and export these critical technologies globally. Deployment of carbon management technologies also provides the opportunity to retain and create jobs at existing industrial facilities and power plants that consistently pay above prevailing wages, benefiting affected communities in energy-producing and industrial regions of our country. At the same time, carbon capture and the utilization technologies significantly reduce some traditional air and other pollutants that have long unjustly burdened many communities. Through responsible project development supported by DOE, additional pollutants of concern can be addressed. Recent and pending legislation before Congress substantially increases the scale and scope of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. If confirmed, I commit to working with you to faithfully meet our climate commitments, sustain high-wage jobs and domestic energy and industrial production, provide environmental benefits to communities, and position the U.S. for continued technology leadership. Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to testify before the committee today, and I, too, look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Crabtree. And by any chance, do you have a member of your family sitting behind you?
I do not, sir. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. Mr. Phillips, we're good to hear from you.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. I'm honored to appear before you this morning as a nominee for the FERC. I would like to thank President Biden for nominating me and for his confidence in my ability to serve. I would also like to thank Chairman Manchin and Majority Leader Schumer for their leadership and commitment to having a full complement at FERC. Having been a regulator in the District of Columbia for over 6 years and a FERC commissioner, a FERC practitioner for much of my legal career, it is the highest honor to be considered for this position. To my wife, Gabrielle, who is in attendance today, and to our 2 young children, Peyton and Tripp, your unwavering support is unmatched. I also want to recognize my mother, Ruby, and my sister, Lynn, who are watching from Alabama with my very, very large extended family. I cannot forget my dear friends and colleagues in the District of Columbia, Mayor Bowser, Councilmember McDuffie, and especially the devoted staff at the DC Public Service Commission. I thank you all for empowering me to continue this journey to serve the nation's capital and the nation. I also want to acknowledge my fellow state commissioners who have entrusted me to serve in leadership roles at NARUC, OPSI, the EPRI Advisory Council, and most recently as president of MACRUC. Your professionalism and commitment to service continue to inspire me. Perhaps E. Erner Goodman said it best, "For he who serves his fellows is, of all his fellows, greatest." Since I was a young boy, I have believed in the values of servant leadership. It is in this spirit that I intend to serve at FERC if I am confirmed. It is through my lived experiences, growing up in rural Alabama, attending the University of Montevallo, studying law at Howard University, working in private practice, and working as a regulator, that I've come to believe that any utility commission should have 3 goals. That is, affordability, reliability, and sustainability. The cornerstone of utility service is reliability. Consumers and businesses and whole industries have to rely on the lights coming on when you flip that switch. I learned that lesson while serving at NERC. I worked with some of the sharpest legal minds in the industry to draft reliability standards for the bulk power system, including critical infrastructure protection standards. I have a keen awareness of the cybersecurity and physical security threats that we face as a nation. And as the effects of climate change and extreme weather increasingly challenge the reliability of our grid, it is imperative that we work to ensure that our nation's energy infrastructure is resilient. Reliability depends on our vigilance against these threats. Like the millions of Americans who have faced financial hardships in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have firsthand knowledge of the importance of affordable energy. I watched my own mother and grandmother do back-breaking labor in Alabama, only earning barely enough to get by. And then I witnessed them do the monthly ritual of spreading these bills out on the dining room table. And I have to tell you, utilities did not always make the cut in my household. And so it is never far from my mind, as I do my work, that there are many people who are less fortunate than even me, who depend on utility regulators to make sure that we have energy services that are efficient at the lowest possible reasonable rates. However, as a regulator, I know that the public interest drives the work of the Commission. It demands that we work with an eye toward ensuring reliable energy for the grid today and a resilient energy infrastructure for the future, one that can meet the challenges of climate change. That is why I'm proud of the work that we've done at the DC PSC to modernize our energy delivery system. If confirmed, these will remain priorities of mine. By balancing these 3 guiding principles and considering the arguments and positions of all parties to a proceeding, I would strive to fulfill the mission of FERC. And if I'm honored to be confirmed, I stand ready to work with my fellow commissioners and FERC staff to do so. Once again, I thank you for allowing me to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
thank all three of you. We appreciate very much your statements and your experience and you're willing to serve. First, I'm going to start with Mr. Phillips' questions, if you will.
Yes, sir.
I think the first question I would ask, do you believe it's in the best interest to maintain energy independence in the United States?
Yes, sir.
And that means what in your definition of independence? How do you maintain that?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I believe in an all-of-the-above strategy with regard to the work of the commission. I know that FERC is an economic regulator. They do not pick winners and losers. At the same time, I'm very aware that we're in the middle of an energy transition. We used to say that the energy transition is coming. I think that it's here today, and I want to do everything that I can, if I'm honored to be confirmed, to push forward innovation to achieve our goal.
You know, pipelines and transmission is a big thing that you are overseeing and making sure that we have connectivity and making sure that the people can depend on that power being delivered when needed. So your thoughts on, as natural gas continues to be a large component, natural gas has switched basically 20 years ago, 16% of our power mix. Now it's 40%. Coal was 52%, now it's 19%. So transitions are going on. Renewables went from 9.5% to 20%. So this is a changing mix, if you will. So your thoughts, basically, the important permitting role. And the permitting role is this: pipelines. To move this product that's so dependent today, we're having a hard time in some parts of our country. Also, moving methane. We know methane's a tremendous factor against the climate. But with that being said, when I've gone out and reached out to people producing, they said, we can't get pipeline permits to move methane, so we flare it off. And so I don't know what your thoughts are on permitting pipelines and making sure that we're able to deliver the energy that's needed.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I believe, and as you stated, that no one would argue that there are efficiencies that can be had with regard to our pipeline certification for natural gas. This is something that, if I'm confirmed, I would commit to work on. It's also something that I have done in my career as a regulator in D.C.
But also methane for the environments, for the quality of our environment, we've got to be able to capture the methane and use it in a more productive way than just flaring it or venting it.
Yes, sir. I absolutely agree.
If I could now, Mr. Crabtree, let me see what we have here. We became a net exporter in 2019, as you know, for the first time in 67 years, in large part because of domestic surge that we had with fracking and oil and gas, and also the reliance we have on nuclear and coal production, and geothermals coming on, and all the different things that we call firm power. So we have firm power, and then we have weather power, and until we get the technology to take care of that. So your thoughts on those and the mix that would take for us to continue to be energy independent?
Senator, thank you for the question. Obviously, our first and foremost obligation is to ensure energy availability, affordability, and reliability. The area of the responsibilities, the Office of Carbon Management, Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, have a big role to play in that regard. You noted that there are a number of sources of dispatchable 24/7 power, for example. If we're to achieve net zero emissions, a goal of the administration, which I support, then we need to be deploying technology that allows those dispatchable sources of generation to continue to provide that reliable baseload support for the new low and zero carbon forms of generation that are coming online. Also to ensure in the viability, long-term viability of our industrial production, that we're decarbonizing those industrial processes as well, sir.
And Mr. Sams, the final question's for you. You have a long history, and I enjoyed your resume and all that you have in your heritage and lineage, which speaks volumes of your understanding of our responsibility to the National Park Service. And with that, if you can give me your top priorities as you see them, because you know with the Great American Outdoors Act that we passed, we're committed to getting our parks up in the standard and deferred maintenance, eliminating some $6 to $9 billion in that arena. What's your thoughts and what's your highest priorities right now as you see it from the perch that you're in now versus the perch you'll be in very quickly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 3 priorities. One is the staff. The one thing I've always learned in leadership, it's the people that are the most important. and therefore helping to improve the morale, listening to the staff, the long-term staff, and figuring out exactly what needs to be done to support them out in the field in order to be the good interpreters they are, to be able to take care of the parks in an appropriate way.
Well, parks are getting inundated right now with visitors because of the COVID, and people want a different lifestyle.
Yes.
So they're going to visit the parks.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
But I'm understanding you're understaffed.
And we are. As I understand it, there is a 20% less staff than there were several years ago, but yet we've seen a 20% increase in parks. And so people are loving their parks to death. You know, the Senate has heard this since 1978, that this was coming and forthcoming. And so we have that backlog of maintenance. And I'm very grateful to all of you here and the Congress as a whole for passing the Great American Outdoors Act, and so that we are making investments back into that infrastructure, making investments back into the staff. And so, but it has to be done in a very clear and open way so that people can see the investments the American people are making into their national park system. And those investments are going to last for the next 50, 75 years or more. And so I'm committed to those three things early on.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Barrasso.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. First, I have to ask all the nominees, prior to this hearing, each of you swore under oath that your answers to the committee's written questionnaire are current, accurate, and complete. Would each of you please verbally affirm that your answers to the questionnaire are current, accurate, and complete, the written questionnaire?
Yes.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Yes.
Any of you ever threatened the physical safety of federal officials verbally or in writing?
No.
And have any of you ever been affiliated or collaborated with an organization that uses violence against fellow Americans?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Sams, to follow up on what Senator Manchin was talking about, you know, the Great American Outdoors Act passed last year, signed by President Trump into law. The law specifically directs the Secretary of Interior to address the maintenance backlog of our nation's parks and other Department of Interior lands. I mean, I agree with everything you said about the morale of staff and working on those areas. The specific backlog of deferred maintenance, there's lists of that needs, certainly for Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, estimated $181 million. For Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, $563 million. Specifically, what will you do to ensure that the Park Service successfully manages this deferred maintenance backlog, certainly in Wyoming, but also across the nation?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. And, you know, we had this discussion. I appreciate you bringing this up. It's extremely important, again, that we do prove that with the methodology that we're using, that would be used at National Park Service, and I need to, of course, look at this and talk with the staff and currently how they're doing that. But those areas that are in most critical need are seeing that funding very early on, because we have to stop that deterioration. And I want to make sure that those investments, you know, are very clear and open to the public, and so that you would see exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Crabtree, today there's a Wall Street Journal editorial, an op-ed by Walter Mead, and the headline is "Energy Crisis Hobbles Biden's Green Agenda." And it says, by artificially depressing fossil fuel production, which we're seeing, and investment in the democratic world faster than renewables and other fuels can fill the gap, that Biden policy promotes a multi-year, multi-trillion-dollar windfall for countries like Russia, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And even on the White House website, it points out that the National Security Advisor has asked OPEC+, including Russia, to produce more energy because we're not doing it here in the United States. So if confirmed, how will you work to ensure that the administration stops helping our enemies and competitors by killing American fossil fuel production?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, I come from a state that is a major producer of all manner of fossil energy resources as well as renewable energy resources, and is a leading agricultural producer that depends on that economy as well. I am a supporter of an all-of-the-above low and zero carbon energy agenda, and President Biden and Secretary Granholm are as well. And if confirmed, I will be committed to advancing that agenda in the context of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. The technologies that office is tasked with supporting deployment of are the very technologies that would allow traditional energy industries, coal, oil, natural gas, to continue in a low-carbon economy and to produce the energy that our country needs, and to do so in conjunction with new renewable and other low and zero carbon resources. And as I mentioned in the previous question, there's the industrial sector as well, which is vital to our national prosperity and well-being. And I really believe, Senator, that we have an opportunity to accomplish our energy security objectives as a country, to support our allies overseas with our energy exports, at the same time to reduce emissions here at home and through those exports to provide a lower carbon energy product to our customers overseas.
Mr. Phillips, in your prepared remarks, you state there are three primary goals of a utility commission, and that is reliability, affordability, and sustainability. And I believe that what we're seeing coming out of the House and the Democrats over there with their tax and spend bill threatens actually all three of the goals that you've outlined. You also said that the cornerstone of utility service is reliability. And I agree. I commend you for putting reliability first. As a commissioner, how are you going to do that? Will you put reliability first, and how will you safeguard that reliability?
Thank you for the question, Senator. First of all, I want to say, just as a starting point, that I believe that climate change is real. I believe that we have a moral and ethical obligation to address it. To your question about how will we do this, I believe, sir, it starts with balance. I believe we have to have balance in our approach. When you think about, I use the example of a three-legged stool. And you think about the integrity of every leg of the stool, it's important to the overall operation. If you have world-class sustainability, but you can't do it and sacrifice reliability, or the chair will fall. If you have wonderful sustainability, but you have gold-plated reliability, and no one can afford to sit in the chair, it makes no sense to me. So with that, sir, I believe that my approach, if I'm honored to be confirmed, would be to seek balance in everything that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Sams, welcome. It's good to meet you, and I look forward to working with you. We have a challenge at the Valles Caldera National Preserve with illegal trespass cattle coming into the preserve from the neighboring Santa Fe National Forest. And these cattle are currently damaging the unique subalpine meadows, the wetlands on the caldera, and they're also having an impact on the preserve's world-class elk herd. I just wanted to ask you, if confirmed, would you work to ensure that the Valles Caldera has adequate fencing to keep trespass cattle out of the preserve?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for bringing this to my attention. You know, I looked at this issue last night, and yes, I am committed to figuring a way to ensure that there are no trespass issues and to working with the sister agencies as the Forest Service and the National Park staff to ensure the area is secured and preserved in the appropriate way.
There's a saying out west that fences make good neighbors, so I look forward to working with you on that issue. Mr. Crabtree, the promise of so-called clean coal faced what many would call a predictable setback recently when the carbon capture portion of the Kemper plant in Mississippi was canceled after running $4 billion over budget, and over $1 billion of which was taxpayer funding. Chevron has experienced a similar setback at their project in Western Australia. There are big engineering challenges, shall we say, at Project Tundra in your home state. Why should we continue to subsidize carbon capture technology when its track record is one of so many high-profile failures?
Senator Heinrich, thank you for the question. So let me start with the latter part of your question first, why we should support the deployment of these technologies. I would refer back, obviously, to the conclusions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and recent modeling and analysis by the International Energy Agency, which makes it crystal clear that we cannot meet mid-century climate goals without economy-wide deployment of these technologies. That's clearly true in the industrial sector, but it's also true to a degree in the power sector. If we're to get to net zero in the power sector, we need dispatchable generation to complement renewable energy resources that are on a low and zero carbon basis. As far as the track record of carbon capture technologies, I would actually suggest that it's quite positive. If we look at any emerging technology and the arc of that technology from early research and development to initial deployment to wider commercialization, there are project failures. I would note that the Kemper project did not fail because of carbon capture technology. It failed because the demonstration of a gasifier technology did not succeed. The carbon capture technology is long proven and widely commercially deployed across the world. And we actually
But not economically deployed, and that's the challenge.
I agree with you, Senator, and that's both a combination, we need a combination of support coming from the Department of Energy and its traditional authorities, and you and other members of Congress are supporting legislation. The Energy Act of 2020, the infrastructure bill, and pending bipartisan legislation would greatly enhance the policy framework that needs to be coupled with the traditional tools and authorities of DOE to help these emerging technologies enter the marketplace with deployment, bring down costs, and we can echo this or repeat the same success that we've seen with solar, which deployment brings cost reductions and then.
Well, I think the difference between any technology that is distributed, solar is a good example, but really solar, wind, even electrolyzers, is those things are highly distributed, whereas when you do large, complex projects, it's much harder to bring down those cost curves. Mr. Phillips, I wanted to ask you, in 2020, I led a letter to then Chairman Chatterjee urging the Commission to implement Section 219B3 of the Federal Power Act. That section requires the Commission to encourage deployment of transmission technologies and other measures to increase the capacity and efficiency of existing transmission facilities and to improve the operation of these facilities. This would include smart grid technologies like power flow controls and other non-wires options. Do you support Commission implementation of Section 219B3 to improve the delivery of power over our existing transmission systems, as well as the expansion that the Chairman talked about?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I want to be careful here because I know that the Commission has the matter that you mentioned, as well as an advance notice of proposed rulemaking that it is released on transmission reform policy. So this is something that I want to be very careful not to prejudge any particular issue. I can tell you, sir, as a general matter, I do support exploring all of these options to increase our flow and to increase our natural gas transmission capacity. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Brad, you know we've been working very hard on carbon capture and sequestration in North Dakota. We actually started back in 2008. We're one of, I think, 2 states in the country that have all the regulatory approvals, both at the state level and from EPA, to actually capture and sequester CO2. Tell me in this role how you would propose to help us crack the code on carbon capture and storage off our coal-fired electric plants and make that not only technologically viable but commercially viable, so that we can do it not only in North Dakota but really across the country, and with that technology continue to produce that low-cost, dependable energy with the best environmental stewardship. How are you going to help make that happen?
Senator, thank you for that question. Obviously, the regulatory framework that North Dakota has in place in partnership with the federal regulatory framework through the delegated authority is critical. In terms of the role and authorities of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, we're seeing both in the context of this administration and in Congress on a bipartisan basis an increasing emphasis on commercial deployment. And the first part of that process, as you know, started in the previous administration with the funding of FEED studies to support the engineering that's necessary for large projects like this. And the next step is the opportunity to provide cost share and other support for these early commercial projects, be they industrial projects, capturing CO2 from various industrial facilities, or in the power sector. And those, of course, in a context of project development and financing, can be complemented with the policy tools that are with the reform and expansion of the 45Q tax credit and enhancements that are being considered can complement what DOE can do to bring projects to the point of commercial feasibility and deployment.
Are you committed to supporting FEED study or funding for the front-end design development, funding for projects like Project Tundra, loan guarantees to help these companies actually finance and put the carbon capture technology in place, and then things like 45Q, the tax credit, to help them with the cost associated with it? Are you committed to helping deploy those programs to make it happen?
Senator, thank you. As you know, as a nominee, I'm not yet part of the administration. I cannot speak to particular projects. But it is my understanding, and it would be my commitment, that that is the purpose of these programs, is to support the deployment of emerging technologies in the marketplace, be it the DOE loan program or DOE cost share and other things. And of course, that's obviously on the legislative side, the 45Q component of this. But again, as I said, that complements and leverages the ability of the Department of Energy to support projects of that nature.
And if approved, you're committed to helping deploy those programs to make it happen?
I'm committed to develop, I'm absolutely committed to seeing the implementation of the programs, the authorizations in the 2020 Energy Act. Obviously, it's pending, but there's further funding for those authorizations in the bipartisan energy bill, as well as additional authorizations. And yes, I'm absolutely committed to implementing the legislation passed by the Congress and the legislative intent.
And that support would be there both for geologic storage as well as sequestration?
I'm not sure. So geologic storage applies to all pathways.
Geologic storage, sequestration, but also as EOR, I should say, I'm sorry.
So let me, with respect to EOR, storage through enhanced oil recovery is a fully commercial, it's a pathway under the 45Q tax credit, as you know. It is a fully commercial approach. It's been demonstrated over decades. It first began 50 years ago. The focus of the administration and the focus of bipartisan legislation in Congress is scaling up what is arguably a more neglected pathway for the future, which is saline geologic storage. As you know, we only have one permitted commercial scale storage operation in the United States today. That's the Decatur facility in Illinois. And for the viability, whether it's the power sector or decarbonization of the industrial side, it's urgent that we scale up saline geologic storage. It's very important to industry for reasons of the long-term storage capacity, the geographic distribution of those reservoirs, but also the ability to reduce carbon emissions even deeper long-term.
Right, but I'm talking about both EOR and geologic storage.
I can't speak to, in terms of specific projects of DOE, whether there is a decision about actually providing support for projects that rely on EOR storage per se. But I'm committed to supporting all pathways.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm over my time, so I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. I'm calling on myself next, and then Senator Langford or Marshall, whoever is here, followed by Senator Hirono. So thank you all. I want to start with you, Mr. Phillips. We had a chance to have a conversation, but I just want to clarify for the record, you do support the anti-manipulation authority that FERC has and its continued use in policing energy markets.
Yes.
Thank you. One of the other issues that my colleague, Senator Heinrich, just touched on, and I'm sure others, is this issue of how we grow and continue to diversify. In the Northwest, even though we're a hydro state, I guarantee you that climate is impacting snowpack, which then impacts hydro, which then has many impacts. So we want to diversify. And PNNL, our Pacific Northwest Laboratory, is a leader in battery storage, and also released a study called the SEAMS study, evaluating the costs and benefits of strengthening our interties and seams between Western and Eastern power grids. The balkanization is definitely costing us, and so I want to make sure that I understand, do you believe we need to do more to connect regional grids and install transmission capacity to transfer power where it is needed? And do you believe we should be encouraging more investment in interties?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. We'll get back to you on more details, but obviously before us is a big infrastructure investment plan that would do just this. And I think we should be doing more on this if we want to empower more solutions, particularly on the storage, the battery storage side. Okay, I need to go to Mr. Sams. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, obviously we made a major investment in our public lands with the investments that we did in the Great American Outdoors Act, which this committee played a major role in, trying to alleviate the backlog in maintenance. And obviously, parks, as you know, in the Pacific Northwest are big business. They generate $2.3 billion in state and local revenue in our state and over 100,000 jobs on all public lands. So helping to fix the backlog in maintenance, we have $427 million in deferred maintenance. There are projects at Olympic National Park. It's a 50-year-old water treatment facility that needs upgrading, and we need investing in campgrounds at Mount Rainier and sidewalks and visitor center upgrades at Paradise. So are those things that you can commit to taking care of this backlog and maintenance in our national parks?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I'm committed to reviewing all of that in the process that's currently the National Park Service is using. While I'm not currently in the service, I've been talking with a number of folks about this. I'm committed to making sure those that are in most critical need of repair are prioritized so that they can be taken care of. And again, with an eye on ensuring that they will be usable for the next 50 to 75 years.
Thank you. Do you believe there are enough staff on the ground to begin work on improving our parks?
Well, Senator, as you know, and thank you for the question, as you know, the staff are down by 20% from just several years ago. I think that there needs to be some looking at restaffing so that we can get more boots on the ground to help with these issues.
And how would you suggest we do that?
It'll be looking at figuring out the workforce development and how workforce development and recruitment currently is going on, ensuring that we are preparing the next generation of rangers to be able to be in that part of that workforce by having a diverse workforce and recruiting those folks to come in. The federal government has a number of ways of doing that, and I look forward, if confirmed, of working on those ways to ensure that there are avenues for more folks to come into the service.
So how will we ensure to put dollars efficiently at the National Park Service? I guess I look at this and think, look at yourself, look at other people in the Park Service. I feel like I've met so many young people who've come from all over the United States. I think about our former colleague, Congressman Dingell, who told me that he worked in our national park system. Like, this is a job a lot of people would like. So how do we increase this opportunity and communication to people, particularly at this time?
Thank you, Senator. You have to go out and recruit people where they're at, not where you want them to come. And I think we need to get out to the community and be able to do that. I had the great pleasure when I worked for City Volunteer Corps of New York in the 90s of working at Grant's Tomb. And that's really what inspired me to think of, how does the National Park Service work? What does it protect and preserve? And how do we get people on there? My own experience is when you walk into the footsteps of your fellow Americans in these places, these hallowed halls, these hallowed lands, you get that invigoration. And so if we can go out and recruit people, bring them into the parks, show them that, and show them that there are career paths forward for them, I think that's how we get the recruitment done.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, everybody. My first question for Mr. Sams. Mr. Sams, about 6 years ago, we had our first grandchild, and my wife and I were having the conversation of what's next in life. And we went through our bucket list. And as I recall the conversation, it started off like, we've done your bucket list, and now it's time for her bucket list. And on the bucket list was to go to every national park in the United States. And we've made a big dent at that. I didn't realize 423 areas that we got to get to now. So that's quite a challenge. Would you describe that you have a labor shortage or a labor problem right now at the National Park Service?
Thank you, Senator. I believe there is just a lack of staffing. We're down 20% for a number of reasons. So when you look at that and the amount of people that are coming into the parks, there's definitely a need for additional staff to help with the overcrowding issue, to ensure that the preservation is taking effect, to ensure we have enough interpreters out on the ground.
Any idea how many of the staff, what percentage are not vaccinated?
I do not have that information, Senator.
Do you think a vaccine mandate would make the labor shortage worse when it goes into effect?
I would look to the CDC and the administration on that.
I understand that, and I do too. I support vaccines, but if your industry is like every industry I know, 20–30% of people are not vaccinated yet, and encourage those people to talk to their doctor about the pros and cons of the vaccine, but there's a large number, and I think you would agree with me that it could have make a bad problem even worse.
Thank you, Senator. I do. I served as the incident commander for the Confederate Tribes Umatilla Indian Reservation for the COVID-19, and I understand that importance of encouraging folks so that we can continue to make sure that work happened. But I will look to the administration and to CDC on any.
Of course. Yeah, Mr. Crabtree had a great conversation yesterday. You know as much about carbon capture as anybody I've met so far, and look forward to working with you. Certainly we share so many of the same goals and the same passions to leave this great world we live in healthier, cleaner, safer than we found it. And I think that carbon capture could be a huge part of that. Biofuels, I think, have some great opportunities already across Kansas, many states. Your home state, ethanol plants are already doing carbon capture as well going forward. I'm always surprised as I look at the White House's policy on our environment that they leave out biofuels and don't look to it. Already, but right now, we could cut tailpipe emissions in half for this world if we would go to E15, cut it in half again if we went to E30. Why does this White House not include biofuels in any of their solutions for the environment?
Senator, well, first of all, thank you for meeting with me yesterday. I too enjoyed our conversation, and I've enjoyed, as we talked about, multiple trips to your state to talk about the opportunities for carbon management on the ground in Kansas, and they're significant. As far as biofuels, one thing we didn't talk about a lot is the specific opportunity in the context of continuing to reduce the biofuels are already a low-carbon fuel, makes a significant contribution to our nation's energy supply, but there are considerable opportunities to further reduce the carbon footprint of biofuels through carbon capture, the CO2 produced from fermentation. The major challenge there is not technological. We've been capturing CO2 from ethanol plants for many, many years. The challenge is infrastructure. And so that's the build out of CO2 transport and storage infrastructure is a priority of the Department of Energy, of the office that, if confirmed, I would be representing. And it's also a priority of bipartisan legislation in the Congress.
Will that infrastructure require pipelines?
Yes, absolutely would, and I think there's an opportunity on a regional basis in your state and surrounding states that are ethanol producers to knit those ethanol plants together in a pipeline network that would take that CO2 to geologic storage locations. And it would create an economic opportunity for that industry because, as you know, states like California have state policies such as the low carbon fuel standard that reward those further emissions reductions. And so it would actually create market opportunity for biofuels.
Thank you. I need to move on now. Mr. Phillips, as you're aware of, this past winter, February, we had a huge winter freeze. Energy prices went up exponentially. My folks back home are going to have their heating bill is going to be double for the next 10 years because of that. So 2 questions. Who do you think made all the money? Who profited from that situation? And then what can FERC's role be in the future to help prevent those big energy cost spikes from going up?
Thank you, Senator. First of all, let me say what happened with Winter Storm Uri, it shouldn't have happened. To be clear, people have an expectation that the power is going to be on, and that's something that I will work to continue to do. With regard to who made the money, I want to be clear here. NERC and FERC, they have an ongoing inquiry into this situation, and so we don't know all the facts. We don't know everything that happened, but I can promise you this: if given the opportunity to serve, I will make sure and look for ways that FERC, the federal government, can help intervene to make sure that something like this, when you talk about people having to pay off this bill for over 10 years, that's something that I believe is unacceptable.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Hirona.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congratulations to all of the nominees. I ask the following 2 initial questions of all nominees before any of the committees who come before me. So I will ask the panel en masse. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No. No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
For Mr. including the Office of Hawaiian Affairs to facilitate the acquisition of mention of your commitment to consulting various stakeholders if confirmed, but based on your experience, indigenous communities in terms of increasing representation within the workforce, telling of their stories, and incorporation of indigenous views in decision-making.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. Yes, I think that it's a great opportunity to express America's history in its broadest aspect. You know, I've watched the changes over the years. When we looked at I've been to the Custard Battlefield when it was still the battlefield before it became, you know, more of a memorial. I've watched the growth of America as a whole to be able to talk about the history openly and honestly. I look forward to working with Native communities across the United States, whether that's in your home state of Hawaii or Alaskan Natives and throughout the U.S. territories, to make sure that the story can be told as broadly as possible. And I think it's important to be able to work with Native folks on traditional ecological knowledge and helping manage those spaces so that we're conserving them based on 10,000 plus years of management of those spaces to ensure that they'll be here for future generations to enjoy.
So if confirmed, I look forward to the kind of specific outreach that you will engage in with Indigenous groups. Particularly, I don't know if you have a copy of the letter that I just put into the record, but there are a number of Native Hawaiian groups that you have worked with over time. For Mr. Crabtree, President Biden established the Justice 40 initiative to ensure that at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy go to disadvantaged communities. If you are confirmed, how would you apply that initiative to address the pollution burden that fossil fuel plants place on their neighboring communities?
Senator Rono, thank you for the question. Environmental justice has to be a core commitment in everything we do in implementing the programs of the Department of Energy and the Office of Carbon Management, Fossil Energy and Carbon Management in particular. The types of projects that are supported by the office are indeed with facilities that have impacts beyond carbon emissions, be they power plants or industrial facilities. And there are communities that live in close proximity to these facilities. I mentioned in my testimony that carbon capture technologies and carbon utilization technologies do have some benefits beyond reducing carbon emissions in terms of air pollutants and other types of pollutants. You have to manage those pollutants in terms of the carbon capture technologies themselves. That said, there are other pollutants that have burdened communities for generations that are not affected. And it's incumbent upon on the administration and on me in my role in this office in terms of the demonstration projects and others that move forward to make sure that we're taking those extra steps, mitigation practices, additional technologies and investments to make sure that we're reducing that burden on communities. And I would also add that it's not just environmental, it's economic. There's an opportunity working across government, other parts of the DOE, other agencies, to make sure that the jobs that are created through these projects, that members of communities that live on the front lines actually have the opportunity to get some of those jobs.
Mr. Crabtree, based on your answer just now, it seems that you have given thought to how you're going to implement this initiative on the part of the president. So if confirmed, I would really want to know specifically what you are doing in this area and how the communities are benefiting. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Langford.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony today. I want to be able to drill down on a couple of things you just said, Mr. Crabtree, as well. You're very familiar with enhanced oil recovery, where you inject CO2 into a site to be able to increase the amount of oil out of that well, but it also stores carbon then also into the formation itself. Is that something that you see as a promising technology? It's not new by any means, but is that something that is a solution to reducing carbon?
Senator, thanks for the question. Yes, I do. I would actually go further and say it's established technology that has opportunity to continue to contribute both to domestic energy security and emissions reductions, but it is a fully commercial technology. It started in 1972 in West Texas. As you know, Senator, your own state has examples of deployment of that technology. The role of the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management is to support the development and a wider demonstration and deployment of emerging technologies. In the context of storage, which enhanced oil recovery is properly regulated and implemented, provides a form of geologic storage, even though the purpose is oil production. Long-term, both for the benefits of the industries that need emission solutions and addressing climate concerns, we need to be scaling up and demonstrating saline geologic storage. Your own state, many regions of the country have large saline formations. They have the ability to store hundreds, potentially thousands of years worth of emissions, so there's an opportunity that's greater than in oil and gas fields. There's also an opportunity when you store CO2 in a saline geologic formation to achieve deeper reductions, which ultimately benefit the industry that's emitting that CO2. So in terms of a focus of this department and also even bipartisan legislation that has been passed and is under consideration, is on taking that next step in really proving out storage in these other types of geologic formations.
So let me drill down a little bit more as well. How many wells would have to be drilled to actually do greater storage of carbon, and how many miles of pipeline would you estimate would have to be laid to be able to do that? Because that has always been the conversation, is the amount of pipeline, where you take it from, where it's produced, to, and then storage.
Well, so there is an opportunity, and this is a combination, would be a combination of DOE working in conjunction with legislation that's under consideration. There is an opportunity to build infrastructure for transporting CO2 larger than would be needed to accommodate the initial projects. So the SCALE Act, which is a bipartisan legislation, and President Biden also included that legislation in his American Jobs Plan. So there's administration and congressional support for this approach, would provide DOE the authority and the ability to provide low-interest loans and grant support so that this initial infrastructure along existing rights-of-way wherever possible could be built larger, so that as new industrial facilities, power plants bring carbon capture online, they're building into existing infrastructure that has the smallest possible surface footprint.
So what's your best guess on cost per ton of storing carbon that is produced from power generation, whatever it might be, once you build in the capture, the transportation, and the storage?
Senator, that is so situation technology specific. There are ranges for each type of industry.
Right.
And I could go through them with you, but I think it's probably better to follow up in a question for the record than to take time with that detail
Let's do, because I've seen several ranges on that, and obviously that affects the consumer and the location where it's actually produced, the type of geology that's there, how the proximity to locations for storage, how long the pipeline's going to be, all of those things.
With CO2 transport, I can tell you, though, as a general proposition, we need to build economies of scale. If we can do that, CO2 transport is very affordable. But if it's just project to project from one source of emissions to one geologic formation, then it costs more, like it would with electric transmission or anything else.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Phillips, I want to just ask a couple of quick questions here. Obviously, FERC has lots of questions right now coming at them on reliability and getting an answer back. There have been a lot of variations of late where FERC laid out about environmental assessments were fine, then came back later and said environmental impact statements are going to be needed. So trying to be able to figure out getting a consistent answer and a rapid answer that's accurate the first time from FERC is a very important thing. What would be your role in that to try to make sure that we're getting timely, accurate answers?
I believe that FERC's role with regard to making sure that their decisions are legally durable is something that I will focus on. I do acknowledge that there have been many twists and turns, as you state, sir, but to be clear, the D.C. Circuit has been clear to FERC that they have a responsibility to consider climate change, environmental justice, and this is something that if I'm confirmed, I will also be focused on.
I'll pose a question for the record to be able to follow up on this as well, because there are a lot of questions, just capital investment, that are looking 30, 40 years in the future, trying to be able to do capital investment and trying to figure out where to be able to put those dollars. There's a balance between reliability and environmental issues. Obviously, these two sets of questions go together on how we're actually capturing carbon in the process, but people are trying to figure out where to go and where to invest dollars, and if they have to pause on that, the American consumer is the one that's actually hurt in the process. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Congratulations to all the nominees. Mr. Phillips, let me start with you. Electric power systems in many Western states are under stress via wildfires, persistent drought, and heat waves. We've seen that time and time again. It's now happening year-round. In fact, I've seen in 2021, there was a summer reliability report that the North American Electric Reliability Corporation recognized these concerns and warned that Western states are at an elevated risk of energy shortfalls. We've been talking about that. From your perspective, what challenges still exist when assessing the vulnerabilities of our bulk power system to extreme weather and in developing appropriate actions to plan and adapt to mitigate these extreme weather conditions?
Thank you, Senator. My time at NERC, I actually worked on similar reports that you're talking about regarding reliability. And as a general matter, I believe that it is so critically important that we address this issue and that we get it right. I want to applaud the people at NERC and FERC. I believe that they have some of the best legal minds, engineers working on these issues. This is something that I continue to pay close attention to. And it's something that, if I'm confirmed, I think that we should look for opportunities to do more collaborative work between FERC and NERC to make sure that you have a meeting of these great minds, that they come together. I believe that NERC has under Section 215 of the Federal Power Act, they have by design, a very narrow view of reliability, while FERC, in its authority under the Federal Power Act, is very broad. It involves everything from transmission, natural gas, dam safety. I believe that there is an opportunity to get both of these excellent staffs together, and even at the senior level, to look for how we can better improve even more our reliability.
I appreciate that. Long-term transmission planning based on potential growth in electrical loads and generation resource expansion will continue to play a critical role in maintaining the flexibility required for a reliable and robust transmission system. From your perspective, how can FERC accelerate and enhance transmission upgrades across the country?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that FERC and NARUC, they announced this summer a joint task force to look at the issue of transmission reform. I want to actually say something about some of my colleagues. The chair of the Pennsylvania Commission, Gladys Brown-Dutrell, and the chair of the Maryland Commission, Jason Stanek, they are serving on this task force. As a commissioner at FERC, I would pay close attention to the recommendations that come out of that joint task force, and also pay close attention and participate to the extent that I can to make sure that we get to the right answer.
Thank you. And now Senator Hirono touched on this, so let me ask Mr. Sams this question. If approved, how would you factor environmental justice into future decision and efforts at your respective agency?
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the question. You know, environmental justice is an important issue across America. Folks, particularly people of color, have suffered disproportionately on some of those issues. I think that by listening to those communities and talking to stakeholders, we can find that balance to bring justice forward and to ensure that things are repaired in a way and that there are active voices in the community in those discussion points on how we do preservation in national parks.
Thank you. And, you know, if appointed, I would hope that you would come to us and be candid with respect to your staffing concerns and issues that we've talked about, along with the backlog that we know is out there for our parks across the country. So please don't hesitate to come forward. Mr. Crabtree, there's no doubt you have extensive knowledge in direct air capture. And let me just ask you this. In your opinion, what additional growth in the clean energy sector will be needed to support the negative emission technologies?
Senator, thanks for the question. You are right. That is a part of direct air capture that doesn't get nearly as much discussion as the research, development, and deployment of the direct air capture technology itself. Is as we scale this up, if you think about mid-century modeling of getting to net zero and then ultimately getting to negative emissions where we're pulling carbon from the atmosphere that we've already put there, that imagines a level of deployment that's at gigaton scale, and the energy demands will be quite significant. I don't want to I actually have reviewed analysis that's modeled what levels of energy. I don't recall the specifics, so I would be happy to address that in a question for the record.
Absolutely.
But that clearly, Senator, has to be part of the long-term planning as we think about, well, for example, in the Energy Act, the Energy Infrastructure Act that came out of this committee and now is in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, there is there is authorization for direct air capture hubs, as you surely know. And that creates an opportunity to start to think about creating the whole ecosystem that will be necessary to commercialize and deploy this technology, not just the hardware itself, but what has to be part of the whole system to make that work and deliver on its climate goals.
Thank you. Congratulations again.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Daines.
Chairman Manchin, thank you, as well as to Ranking Member Barrasso. I want to thank the nominees for willingness to serve in these important positions. I invite you each to come out to Montana and see firsthand how we understand balance, how you can have
energy production, to make sure you have great high-paying jobs and reliable, low-cost energy, at the same time conservation. We've figured that out, and I hope you could come out and see what we do there, and hope we could apply these principles. We can bring balance to this discussion on conservation and energy. Mr. Sam, Senator King and I recently held a hearing to examine the impact of increased visitation to our national parks and other park units. We've seen major increases of attendance at our national parks, parks like Yellowstone and Glacier, record visitation in some cases. Increased visitation can bring a lot of great benefits: more jobs, better revenues for our gateway communities, more people exploring and learning, and greater appreciation for the great outdoors. But increased visitation also has had an impact on our park employees, really stretching the limits on infrastructure as well as the landscapes. Mr. Sams, if confirmed, what actions would you consider taking to encourage visitation while also ensuring that our parks and our park employees are protecting the resources they need?
Well, thank you, Senator. First and foremost, I think that, our parks are crown jewels, and many Americans and even many foreigners come to our parks to come and look at it. And I think, but encouraging to have that displacement pushed out a little bit further to some of the national monuments and other parks that are not necessarily seeing as much visitors as we'd like them to. But I want to make sure that we have a campaign that is very inclusive to bring everybody into the park so that they can enjoy these spaces. Your discussion, and thank you for your conversation a couple weeks ago, the infrastructure issues that are needed to ensure that staff have housing, I think is a critical issue in figuring out this housing, whether that is the reconstruction of housing within the national park system for staff, or whether that's public-private partnerships on those gateway communities and working with local communities and figuring out how we can help do housing development so folks can move in. I know in your state, people are having to travel as much as 50 miles away just to get to their service duty station. And we need to be able to figure this out in those gateway communities and how to partner.
Yeah, as you know, many of us who represent western states, they've discovered it's a great place to live, and we got a lot of folks moving there. And it's putting a lot of pressure on housing market prices, whether it's buying or renting, and that directly affects employees, whether they're directly involved with the Park Service or the supporting businesses. Mr. Sams, last year we passed the historic Great America Outdoors Act. It really, I think, is one of these great achievements in conservation, perhaps the greatest achievement in 50 years, will help restore and invest in our national parks. If confirmed, you'll be in charge of implementing that program. What actions will you take to implement this important legislation that we passed, and how will you ensure that funding is distributed fairly among the parks in the states, no matter their location or their size?
Thank you, Senator. While I'm not in the service, and if confirmed, I do want to work with the dedicated staff there and really ensure how we're going about how projects are being ranked and how the money is going out is a very transparent process, and that information is shared, of course, with the committee and the subcommittee on those issues, and wanting to make sure, if you will, the best bang for the buck, ensuring that the investments that the American people are making are going to those critical pieces of infrastructure so that they will be sustainable for the next 50 to 75 years, looking at new technologies and ways to bring those technologies out onto the ground and find where those cost savings are.
Mr. Sams, thank you. Chairman Phillips, as you know, FERC's mission is to ensure consumers have safe, reliable, and affordable energy. If confirmed, you'll be reviewing and approving natural gas pipelines, electric transmission systems, hydroelectric dams, and more. And in Montana, energy production creates solid, great, high-paying jobs. This supports our communities, ensures that the lights and the heat stay on during cold winter days. I got to tell you, I was speaking to one of our co-ops just yesterday. They're very concerned where the administration is headed, taking us down a path where Europe finds itself today with skyrocketing natural gas prices, skyrocketing coal prices, and oil prices. Chairman Phillips, will you commit to reviewing proposals that come before you at FERC fairly, without political or fuel bias, and with a focus on FERC's core mission of ensuring safe, reliable, and affordable energy for Montanans?
Thank you. And thank you for the conversation that we had about this topic as well. I can tell you, as a regulator, what you just described, this is the core job. This is what I do every day at the D.C. Public Service Commission. is I try to just focus on the facts, focus on the law, and try to come to a reasoned, principled decision, a public interest determination. I believe that the public interest drives the work of the commission, and that as a regulator, you have to block out all the chatter and just focus on what's in front of you.
Chairman Phillips, thank you. Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman?
Senator. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crabtree, one of your responsibilities as natural gas and LNG, to put it as gently as I can, we're seeing a doubling since last year of natural gas prices. At the same time, the highest LNG exports in history, and there are projects in the pipeline. We're now exporting about 10% of our daily production. There are projects in the pipeline that will double that over the next year or so. Can't you do something in your regulatory posture that will relate exports to domestic prices? The low price of natural gas is a competitive advantage for this country vis-a-vis the rest of the world. We are literally exporting that advantage. Talk to me about the relationship between domestic prices and exports. Senator Stabenow and I have been talking about this for 5 years. Now it's coming to roost.
Senator, thank you for the question. And the LNG and the exports of LNG and the domestic use of natural gas, they raise a series of concerns. On the one hand, as you know, providing LNG to our friends and allies overseas so that they're not dependent on the production from our adversaries is a benefit to our country and to global security. Also,
I understand that but not including doubling domestic prices.
No, I'm sorry, Senator, what I was going to say, but at the same time, and it's the responsibility under the Natural Gas Act in the review that the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management does at DOE to determine whether a facility is in the national interest is the concern about domestic prices, and that has to be part of that consideration.
Are those studies done in order to before approving a new LNG export license?
Senator,
in other words, are there studies being done, economic studies, to determine the effect on domestic prices of a given LNG export increase?
So, Senator, I want to be very candid with you. As you can see from my personal background, it is not in the area of regulating LNG, and I am very quickly doing the best I can to understand the responsibilities of this office and the roles and authorities of DOE. And it is my understanding that domestic natural gas prices are a very important consideration. As far as actual studies being done, may I get back to you in terms of a question for the record?
I've been asking this question for 5 years. It's my understanding that it's not one of the considerations that's being taken, that's being referred to in this process. Will you commit to me to looking at that issue and the relationship between exports and domestic prices?
I commit to you to, if confirmed, to work with the leadership at DOE to be responsive to this concern of yours.
Thank you. Mr. Sams, you have a very impressive resume. The only thing missing is National Park Service. Convince me that you're ready to take on this challenge, having had no experience as a park ranger, a park manager, or otherwise involved in the National Park Service.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. You know, for the last decade, I've been part of the executive team in managing one of our original reserves, which is in a reservation, literally the Umatilla Indian Reservation, which is over 190,000 acre reservation, along with the 6 million acres of land co-managing with local, state, and federal officials. And those will include also national parks, parklands, and other resources. And over my career, I've actually worked inside of national parks, mostly with volunteers and eradicating invasive species, cleaning up and doing preservation work, in addition to providing additional lands to national parks when I was with the Trust for Public Land and donating land actually in national parks to expand parks for visitation. And over the last decade, I've worked very closely in my home state on a number of initiatives of Oregon's Outdoor Initiative and its Parks Initiative, helping the state director really figure out how we do traditional ecological knowledge, how we do interpretation.
Well, when you take office, and I intend to support your nomination, when you take office, you're not going to be doing it alone. Will you commit to me to bringing in the
executive infrastructure with the experience in the National Park Service to assist you in your management responsibilities?
Yes, Senator, I will definitely commit to that. The long experience of the staff there is key to anything that I would ever do.
And this has been touched upon, but I think one of your first areas of attention should be staffing. I've got a chart that I used at a prior hearing that shows Yellowstone's visitation almost doubling. The staff is pretty much the same. And in fact, staffing is something like 20% below where it was 10 years ago, and yet visitation at the parks is exploding. I hope that you will commit to a serious analysis of staffing needs, because not only is it not serving the public adequately, but my understanding is it's driving down morale within the service, and that's not good.
Yes, sir. While I've not been in the service, I have looked at their surveys, and I see that very clearly. I'm committed to looking at the workforce development and how that's going to take.
Will you advocate within the administration for increased funding to the Park Service?
Yes,
for
sir.
staffing? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciated the opportunity to visit with each of you by phone. I'm struck that this is a pretty calm hearing, all things considered. The fact that we have a FERC nominee, we usually don't get such a calm proceeding. But in my conversations with each of you, I've been struck that you come to these positions with a level of experience and expertise, and you seem like rational men. So that's a good place to start today. Mr. Crabtree, I enjoyed our conversation yesterday. I shared with you I've just come from Iceland, where they are leading in some pretty cool things when it comes to CCUS. Had an opportunity to be briefed by the folks at CarbFix, which really focuses on the sequestration, if you will, within a basalt geographic formation. And I was struck in my discussions with them in looking at the map of the United States and where we have identified significant geologic areas that could be these receptors. So it was a good conversation with my colleague, Mr. Langford, here to talk about how this might play out in Alaska, in America here. But it is something that I think we need to look to as we're moving forward with measures like 45Q to make sure that it's not just salinity-based geologic formations that this is applicable to, but also basalt formations. So I share that with you. I hope you had an opportunity to look at what that Australian guy is doing with iron ore.
I read the New York Times article last night, Senator. Thank you for flagging it for me.
So I'm leading up to a question here, which is you have been involved with this carbon capture coalition here for a period of years. You obviously get briefed on some interesting things. There's a lot that people would say is pie in the sky. Coming from a state like Alaska where we produce, I believe that CCUS is going to be the key for us to be able to continue to be producers. So I'm curious to know what you feel is the most promising technology out there that can actually be moved to commercialization sooner than later, rather than designs on some kind of a drawing board right now.
Well, actually, Senator, there are so many technologies. What I would thank you, first of all, for the question, for your interest in for meeting, or for the phone call yesterday. It was great to talk with you. I'm actually struck by how many technologies have been demonstrated at least once at commercial scale or are very close. And one of the things that I'm very heartened by in terms of the posture of this administration and frankly of members of Congress from both sides of the aisle and in the House and the Senate is the urgency of commercial demonstration. And we have the fruits of many, many years of work coming from the Department of Energy and, of course, the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management in partnership with the labs, with industry. And the results of all those years of work is we're now ready to really ramp up deployment. And that's a combination both of the tools of an office and of DOE with things like cost share and loans and things like that, but coupling them, as you pointed out, with the existing 45Q tax credit and potentially some of the enhancements that are being considered on a bipartisan basis.
Well, and I would suggest that we not just limit our our sights to what we've been doing here, but there are strong examples around the world that we can look to so that we're not kind of reinventing here. I'm close on time here. I could spend all of my questions with you, but I want to turn to Mr. Phillips. I mentioned Alaska's unique energy grid in our system, and we come from a state where hydropower is really the most reliable. It's certainly renewable, but it provides somewhere between 20 and 25% of our state's energy. But so much of this is very small-scale projects, small rural communities. So some of the challenges that has been faced is that these smaller utilities have to go through the FERC for permits, and it's challenging. It's challenging from a process perspective. We want to gain the efficiencies from hydropower, but too often what we see are permitting and legal efficiencies that make the cost of building out these small projects. They're already capital intensive, but you go through the permitting process and now they're completely off the table. What can you share with me about your understanding of what we need to do to provide for this great resource, but also get it through a process that's designed for big build, not your smaller utilities within your remote rural communities?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your time when we talked. You know, one thing that I talk about a lot is efficiency and regulatory certainty in the decisions that a commission make. We talked about that briefly on our call. I believe that I will look for opportunities to make sure that your concerns, which I share, that people have some type of expectation that decisions that come regarding their livelihood, regarding their reliability of their power, that these are decisions that will happen quickly. This is something that I've been focused on and something that I will continue to focus on.
Well, I would encourage you to come to Alaska and see what we're talking about when we're mentioning what these small hydro projects really are. Because I think for some who have been used to big hydro, they can't even imagine the size, the scale that we're operating within Alaska. Mr. Sams, you and I had an opportunity to talk about the Denali Park Road and what needs to be done with that, as we're seeing that road now being closed, at least for the next couple seasons there. We've got an obligation under ANILCA to the inholders there in Kantishna. You've told me you've been in there, so we've got to make sure that we're able to keep the commitment, the obligation that we have to those inholders. We need to get a permanent regional director for Region 11 confirmed. That's been sitting open now for some time, and that creates a leadership vacuum there. We've got some work to do, but know that that is something that we want to stay in close contact with you. Mr. Chairman, I'm well over my time, but
No,
thank
never.
you to the
You're never
witnesses.
over your time.
You're so good.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Such blatant
She yield back her
favoritism.
time to you, Senator.
So I'm starting out at 4 minutes. Mr. Sams, I want to submit, for the record, a letter of support from Chairman Baker of the Southern Ute Tribe in Colorado in support of your nomination. Chairman Baker highlights Mr. Sams' decades of service to his tribe in land management, related issues, his courageous service to our nation as a naval intelligence specialist, an analyst during wartime. Mr. Sams, thank you for your service. We are honored to have you with us today, and I commend you for your commitment to this work. My staff has submitted a letter of a copy of the letter to committee staff for the record. Now, Mr. Crabtree, and it's wonderful when I hear Senator Murkowski talking about basalt flows and other mafic lavas to get that geology into the record. And I'm not going to hold it against you that Matt Mead is a friend of yours and a supporter of yours as the former Republican governor of Wyoming, who is a great friend. But I also commend you for your service and all the work you've done in looking at some of these innovations in clean energy technologies. And Historically, these innovations have relied on a combination of tax incentives and DOE loans and grants and other forms of assistance. Can you talk just for a moment about how the newer technologies such as CCUS and DAC that we've been talking about here, how does an operator's ability to intelligently combine multiple incentives or awards, how does it accelerate bringing these new technologies to market?
Senator, thank you. Thanks first also for meeting with me yesterday. It was great to finally meet you in person. We missed that opportunity and my working with the other governors to connect with you when you were governor of Colorado. So I enjoyed that. And that's a great question. There's a difference between emerging technologies for which there may be technological experience at commercial scale, but not actual commercial experience or commercial confidence in the marketplace, be it operational or among investors. And in those instances, there's greater commercial risk, investment risk, in deploying these technologies. And if through public policy and through the programs of government, we want to make sure that we bring those technologies into the marketplace, achieve deployment, and bring costs down, it's critical that we're able to pair policies of traditional tools that the Department of Energy might have, loans, cost share, other types of, also other agencies bring things to the table, pairing those with tax credits. And, there are many examples I could point to, but in the interest of brevity, one that I think people are aware of that's very important is utility scale solar. During the financial crisis, as you know, the nation responded and Congress responded with the stimulus legislation that included funding for commercial scale projects. And in the case of utility scale solar, the early project developers were able to pair DOE loans with the investment tax credit. And it was that ability to pair the two that made possible the first commercial scale, utility scale solar projects in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that is still, if you look at how successful that was and how important it was, and you recognize that everyone from Bill Gates on down the line realized that we're going to have to figure out how to get carbon out of the air in addition to wind and solar and accelerating those transitions as well.
Yes.
Pairing those together is obviously going to be very important. So appreciate your work on that and your bipartisan approach. Mr. Phillips, thank you for your service as well. Obviously, the rest of the world is actively building transmission, adding to the grid, while we seem to be twiddling our thumbs to some extent. Since 2014, China has developed 260 gigawatts of new interregional transmission capacities. That's 260 gigawatts. Would you like to guess how much the United States has developed since 2014? I don't want to put you on the spot, but it is 3 gigawatts. And I think that we have over 700 gigawatts waiting in line for those investments to allow them to get on the grid. So the need is there. China is out there, and we appear to be somewhat out of lunch. So my question to you is, if confirmed, what can you do, what will you be able to do to help improve transmission planning and alleviate our interconnection bottleneck?
As I mentioned earlier, FERC actually has an ANOPR that's out right now to address just this issue. There were over 200 questions proposed in the ANOPR. Comments came in, initial comments on October 12th. I believe there's another round of comments that will come in on November 30th. And so you're asking the right questions, Senator, and I do share your concerns that we need to find a way. If we are going to meet our goals, I believe that electric transmission will play an important part in doing that.
Great. Well, thank you. I think you're going to have your work is every bit as important as anything in terms of the transition of this country to cleaner energy. I'm out of time, but Mr. Sams, maybe what I will do is put a couple questions to you into the record. Obviously, I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we do get access to green space for everyone. And the Trust for Public Land, obviously, the big believer in this. We bought into some of their frameworks of making sure that everybody's within a 10-minute walk of a green space. You're going to be in a great position to help that. So I will hold off, not put you on the spot now, although I understand and respect that you could easily answer any of the questions, but I will make sure that we get them into the record.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Thank you. When the chair is finished discussing with the great senator from Alaska, I will yield back the floor.
You're yielding back your minus.
No, yielding back to the senator from Alaska.
Senator Lee, you ready?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of you for your service and for being here. Mr. Sams, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. We've had some issues in Utah. We've got a lot of fantastic national parks. They're national treasures. People love to visit them. There's been some deferred maintenance backlog issues that we've faced. Some of these have become especially acute over the last year or so. For example, in the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area and at Rainbow Bridge National Monument, we're facing a real uphill battle as a result of water levels at Lake Powell. The water levels are low, and so low that when coupled with the maintenance issues that we've got at Lake Powell, people aren't able to access the lake. We got to the point where most of the ramps became unusable. They just couldn't access them. This is a real national treasure, one that people want to be able to access. They can't really do it right now. Now, so what I'm hoping is that the National Park Service will figure out how to determine the $229 million from an emergency appropriation that can go to these things, and I hope it'll figure out how to use it well. But on top of this, there are several additional projects that are meant to ensure continued access to water, and those are in the queue for the Great American Outdoors Act funds that haven't been made a priority yet for the agency. Now, all of this is interesting to me when we take into account the fact that Virginia and North Carolina and New York have gotten significant funds under the Great American Outdoors Act, receiving, in the case of Virginia, $247 million, $153 million in the case of North Carolina, and $50.5 million in the case of New York. Do you have any idea what the percentage of total federal land those states have? It's not significant. It's not at a rate that one would conclude based on the amount of money we spent there. In Virginia, they've got 0.39% of the entire federal estate. North Carolina, 0.39%, also, same as Virginia. In New York, it's 0.03% of all federal land. And yet the land that Utah has as a percentage of the total federal land estate is 5.4%. Two-thirds of my state is federal land. Between 66 and 67% of the land is federal. We contribute greatly to everything from national park visitation to federal revenues achieved through oil and gas on our land. And yet, you want to know how much money Utah has received in Great American Outdoors Act funding? It's only $7.3 million. $7.3 million out of the $1.6 billion in deferred maintenance funding for public lands nationwide. So Virginia got 15.6% of the funding with just 0.39% of the land. Utah got 0.45% of that funding with 5.4% of the land. That's less than 0.5%. If Utah were to have received funding under that same legislation at the same rate as Virginia, all of the $1.6 billion in that act would have gone to Utah. Do you feel like that allocation, as I've just described it, is that fair and equitable? Is that a fair and equitable allocation of those funds?
Thank you, Senator. I am very committed, while I'm not currently in the service, of really reviewing exactly how they come up with this formula and making sure that is in a transparent way, working with this committee and the subcommittee on this issue and bringing that back to you for review and discussion.
Great. I'd appreciate that. And beyond making it transparent, what else can you do to ensure continued access to critical National Park Service units within my state?
I want to work closely with you, Senator, and your members of your state delegation, along with the local stakeholders. My family and I are very much water recreational users. We understand that issue. My wife, who's right behind me, was a river raft guide on the Green River in your great state, and so we've been there many times to enjoy it, and I am committed to figuring out how to make
Fantastic,
this.
fantastic. I imagine you visited Lake Powell in that instance,
Yes.
in which case you know what I'm talking about. Mr. Chairman, I see my time's expired. I've got one more brief
Oh,
question.
there's no problem at
May I
all.
ask that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to compliment the chairman for being such a good chairman. He's fantastic. Handsome man, kind, benevolent, in other words. Mr. Sams, you're probably aware that many, that national parks, when they were created in such a way as to make sure that they didn't impede on low-impact economic uses, things like grazing. What can you do to help preserve these prior existing rights, like grazing, while taking care of our parks?
You know, it's finding that important balance. You know, I've worked on this with treaty issues across the United States with tribes and with my own tribe to ensure that those accesses are available because they're not opposite, they're compatible as long as they're done in a respectful way. And so I'm committed to working with you that if confirmed.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Mark Kelly from the great state of Arizona.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on Senator Lee's line of questioning here about Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, Lake Powell, the water level being at 30%, the boat ramps. I just want to get very specific here. But along the lines of where Senator Lee was going here, do you think it's possible, Mr. Sams, for the National Park Service to utilize funding under the Great American Outdoors Act to adapt Lake Powell boat ramps for drought?
Well, thank you, Senator. I do believe that there's opportunity also to do additional fundraising for that effort and making sure that money has been brought to bear for the boat ramp issue.
You say additional fundraising, but how about using the money under the existing Great American Outdoors Act?
It is possible.
Okay. And if confirmed, could you look into that for us?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Crabtree, we're facing escalating fuel prices in Arizona and across the country. The gallon of gas now is about $3.34 in Arizona nationwide. Families in my state can't afford higher gas prices while the price of crude oil continues to hover around $80 a barrel. I understand that the administration is engaging OPEC to increase supplies and may even consider selling some of our oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve or restricting some U.S. oil exports. Mr. Crabtree, Arizona gets most of its gasoline by pipeline from refiners in Southern California and West Texas. If confirmed, do I have your commitment that any action the department may take on rising gas prices closely examines how refinery capacity in both those states impacts Arizona?
Senator, thank you for the question. Obviously, ensuring energy availability and affordability is job one. I commit to you to, within the administration, to work with leadership at DOE to do what we can in terms of existing authorities to address that. As far as the specifics of refineries, I would appreciate the opportunity to get back to you in a question for the record, something of that specific nature, if that's appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Over $3 a gallon. We're a big state. You know, people have long drives. This is starting to get, I mean, it already is. It's incredibly expensive for families, and we need to address this. Mr. Sams, I want to come back to you in our remaining amount of time here. My next question is about uranium mining around Grand Canyon National Park. Senator Sinema and I sponsored legislation that would protect Grand Canyon, the canyon, and the water supply for the Havasupai tribe from contamination from uranium mining. If confirmed, will you agree to meet with leaders of the Havasupai tribe about this issue and any other concerns that they might have about the management of the Grand Canyon moving forward?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I look forward to meeting with them and discussing this issue. My daughter just returned from a trip there, who's sitting behind me from the Grand Canyon this weekend.
It's nothing like it. Not only in Arizona, in the country, on the planet. And
Yes.
I've seen a lot of the planet. Is working on direct air carbon capture, the ASU Center for Negative Carbon Emissions. In June, the Department of Energy selected the center to develop a carbon farm of mechanical trees that are 1,000 times more efficient at pulling carbon from the atmosphere. Are you aware of ASU's work with DOE, and how would you describe its potential?
Senator, thanks for the question. I am generally aware of ASU's work. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to meet with some of the individuals involved. One of them, as you know, is famous in the field for his leadership, and I would argue it's direct air capture, but also carbon utilization as well, taking captured carbon and transforming it into valuable products and reducing emissions in the process. So ASU has clearly stepped up early in playing a leadership role, and if confirmed, I very much look forward to working with the team at ASU on the things that they're doing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Crabtree, and I yield back 10 seconds.
Oh, my God, I can't believe it. I feel like I'm rich with time. Let me say this to all of you. I want to thank all of you for willing to serve at this high position, the most needed position for our government, coming here and answering in the most, I think, professional manner, the way you all handled yourself. I feel very confident we have 3 nominees that are going to be confirmed with my dialogue with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. And we're going to need your input. I can tell you all through this process because we've got a long way to go. And we got to bring this country together. We really do. And that's what your job is, to help us heal the country and start working more as a united country and not allowing it to be more divided. So with that, I would like to say the members have until 6 p.m. tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record, and the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Senator.